Okay, when trying to prove that two triangles are congruent, you have to always start with the given information and then figure out what's left, because you do need 3 congruency statements to prove triangles congruent, unless you're working with the HL congruency, hypotenuse leg. And in that case, you need a right angle. And so that's kind of your third piece of information there. So let's look at this first one here. If we look at this triangle in our givens, it says that DE is congruent to EC. So let's mark that. DE is congruent to EC. Well, that doesn't look right, but if that's the information they gave us, then that's what we have to go with. We know that our triangles are just mirrored. They're not turned. Then we also were given that BE is congruent to AE. So let's mark that. Notice I'm using 2 tick marks instead of just 1 to show the difference there. And so those are both sides, so let's put an S by both of those, label only one triangle at a time. And so what's the third piece of information that you need? Well, they didn't tell us anything else, so we have to go off things that we know from the past. Things like vertical angles could come in handy, shared sides, alternate interior angles. And so in order to have alternate interiors, you need parallel lines. Well, we don't have that here. In order to have a reflexive side, we don't have a shared side here. All we have here are vertical angles, and that is here in blue. And so that would be our third piece of information. So we could say that these triangles are congruent because of side angle side. So I'm going to make a note of that. We'll need that for our answer. And so now we need to say that the two triangles are congruent. Well, if they start with D, we know that D is congruent to C. E is next, and that's where we go with the next one, and then we finish out with A. So we could say DEB is congruent to CEA because of side angle side. We were given 2 pieces of information. We found the third by vertical angles. So let's look at the next one. Angle TVU, so trace over those. Think about it like this, TVU right there. Now we can see that angle. So angle TVU is congruent to WUV. So if you need to see that, WUV is right there. So we can mark those 2 congruent. Okay, that represents an angle, so let's put an A there. Then we know that side VT is congruent to UW. Okay, so that makes an S. And so what's our third piece of information? We weren't given anything, so we again could use vertical angles. Don't see that. Do you see a shared side? Yes, we see a shared side here with VU. So we can mark that as our third piece of information. So we know that we're going to use side angle side again to prove these two triangles congruent. So let's look at the order they want us to put these in. TUV, so TUV. So who is congruent to T? Well, if you're not sure, go back to this statement here and see how T and W are first. That kind of gives you a clue there to know that T and W go together. So we know W goes first. Then we look at U, so that would be V, and then we finish out with U. Always look at statements that are given and letters that correspond to each other in the givens, and that helps you figure out the order to write your triangles in. And so we know that they are congruent by side angle side. Okay, let's look at the next one. D is the midpoint of MT, so if D is the halfway point, we know that on either side of D, those pieces are equal to each other, so there's a congruent side. MDB and angle T are right angles. Okay, so let's mark that. Don't mark it as an A yet because we might actually get to use HL here. Let's see. BM is congruent to ZD. So let's look. When we have a right angle, and I'm going to take this off for a second, do we have HL, hypotenuse leg? Is the hypotenuse marked? Yes, we can see right here there's a hypotenuse that's marked. Is one of the legs marked? Yes, so we can say that this is going to be HL congruency. We don't need anything else. They gave us all 3 pieces of information. So MDB, if they start with M, then we're going to have to start with D. Then it goes to D next, so we'll go to T, and then finish out with Z by our HL congruency. Okay, let's look at the next one. AD is a angle bisector, so we're cutting an angle in half. Remember, bisect means cut in half. If we're cutting an angle in half, that means that these 2 pieces are congruent, so let's mark those with an A. And BA is congruent to CA, so let's mark that. Now, it's only an angle bisector of one angle, not both, so we don't get to mark both of those angles there, only one. So we got to think about our third piece of information. Do we have vertical angles? No. Do we have a shared side? Yes. So here's our shared side so that we know we're going to use side angle side. So here we go. We start with B, so the other one starts with C, go to A, and then finish out with D. And we know they're congruent because of side angle side congruency. Okay, last one here. U is the midpoint of both YX and WV. So we have two midpoints. So if U is the midpoint of YX, we know that those two pieces are congruent. There's an S. We know that WU and U and V are congruent because U is still a midpoint of that side. So there's another S. But that's not all the givens they gave us. They also told us that WY is congruent to VX. And so that's our third side. So we can see that we're going to use side, side, side. We need to go with our givens first. We don't want to use the vertical angles here because they gave us three pieces of information that we need to use. Don't use something that's not necessary here. So W, U, Y. So if we start with W, we're going to start with V. And if they go to U next, we would go to U on the other one. And then we see that we can finish out with X by side, side, side. Yes, the order of this right here does matter. You have to match it up. And if you're kind of confused on that, especially with the last one, it's a little harder to see. If I know that I'm starting with W, do you see how W is between the 2 and the 3 tick mark here? Well, who else is between the 2 and 3 tick mark? Right there at V. And so that's what I use to look at my...